down to the meeting today. We are thrilled to have a fantastic author, writer, and I should say screenwriter, actor, and director here with us this evening. The first time I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. John Sayles for his book, Yellow Earth, I will never forget his description of the gopher vacuuming scene. He is a fantastic author. Please put your hands together and join me in welcoming Mr. John Sayles!
Thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you didn't have a hard time parking. Did? See, let's get this standing up. Yeah. Crucible takes place in Detroit in Brazil between 1927 and 1943. There's a lot of characters in it, as usual with my stuff. And Brazil comes in because Henry Ford, in his wisdom, at some point decided, you know, I know how to do everything else. Everything I have ever touched turns to gold. I must be touched by a higher power and just be a vessel. And the vessel has told me, why would I want to buy rubber when I could grow my own? And so he bought a chunk of the Amazon basin in Brazil, the size of the state of Connecticut, and sent a bunch of guys who had been working for him as sawyers and lumberjacks, because if you know how to cut down trees, of course you know how to grow trees in the Amazon, even if you don't speak Portuguese.
John, there's two podiums.
Yeah. I'm okay. The first thing I'm going to read you is 1930. The Prohibition is still in effect. And the two characters you're going to meet in this, DeWitt and Alvin, are the sons of Zeke Crowder, who's an African-American man who brought his family up to Arkansas so he can earn a living pouring molten metal in the foundry of Henry Ford's River Rouge factory. DeWitt is 12, and Alvin is 8. A lot gets thrown in the river. It's a game of hide and seek, with the rules being that the law can't just see the rum runners with a boatload aboard. They have to actually lay hands on them, or there's still at least a case of hooch on board. DeWitt and Alvin come down some night and sit with the other guys, watching and listening. The Detroit cops and federals with their spotlights, and the leggers running blind if there's not a moon. Sometimes there's a show, cops on their bullhorns, boat motors roaring, the real movie stuff. And sometimes there's no bullhorns, the boats coming together, agreeing on a deal, and then going their separate ways. Somebody just made a contribution to the police fund, DeWitt tells all the men. With a serious chase, there are often wooden crates of liquor being tossed overboard, and maybe the boys can get hold of whatever floats in. They throw so much away, Alvin said the first time they got lucky, but they still keep hauling it. Supply and demand, his big brother explained. You make something illegal, make it scarce, and it's going to sell for a hell of a lot more than it costs to make it. Only once was there gunfire, pistols and maybe rifles instead of machine guns like in the movies. And all the boys on the bank cheered when the booze boat docked itself behind Belle Isle and the Federals gave up. Stick and run, shouted Alvin, who was nutty about the fights, hanging here at Brewster Center down at Brewster Center to watch the amateurs train, learning language he best forget when he's home. Tonight, they are on a salvage expedition. There's a spot a half-mile down from there where they watch the boat chases, where things drift in, tree branches, garbage, dead fish, and sometimes, if you're lucky, the good Canadian stuff that some booze boat has had to ditch. It is their secret, found on a hunch, and they have to sneak around through Ophé territory to get there. There is an old rotting dock, one corner dipping toward the water, that makes for a perfect entry. They keep the ropes stashed there, and Alvin has gotten good at tying and untying knots. looking them up in a library book about sailing. It starts tight around DeWitt's hips, but always slides up under his arms before they're through, and is looped once around a solid post for safety. Alvin handles the tote bag, lowering it down whenever DeWitt comes up with anything worth keeping. The water is always cold, even like now in the middle of the summer, and once he's in, DeWitt works quick. When you're under, it's near impossible to see, so there's a lot of groping around down in the pilings. Now and then you'll grab onto something you don't even want to think about what it might be. But this is their lucky night. DeWitt always goes down feet first, raising his hands over his head to sink faster. He's wearing only his unders with bare feet to feel the bottom, and they come to rest on what feels like, an awful lot feels like, a wooden crate. He squats down to grope with his fingers, pushes back up to the surface. "Pry bar," he calls to Alvin. Alvin sends the iron pry bar, another thing they keep stashed here, down in the tote bag. DeWitt pulls it out, takes a deep breath, goes under again. He doesn't land in the same place, but close enough to locate the crate quickly. He finds a crack, wedges the bar, yanks. A slat pulls open enough for him to get 3 fingers in. He feels the top of the bottle. "What we got?" calls Alvin, excited when DeWitt comes out. "Bottled and bonded." "Damn!" Alvin has that big grin, always happy-go-lucky kid. "I'm going to retire." It is his new favorite word, having heard that Jack Dempsey is retiring from the ring. "Get that bag hanging down here where I can reach it." On the next dive, DeWitt gets the crate open enough to pull out a bottle, sending it up to Alvin with a pry bar. "Thank you, Hiram Walker and Sons." He's starting to feel achy cold, but it's a full case, too waterlogged to hoist the whole thing up, so it'll have to be a few bottles at a time. The next dive, he wiggles 2 out before he has to come up. While he's slipping them into the bag, not always easy while you're also treading water, something from under the dock bumps him from behind. "Coming out," he calls when he figures out what it is. "What for? Coming out!" Alvin hauls the bag with the bottles up, and DeWitt hauls himself out, wrestling wet rope and pushing his feet off on slimy piling, always his least favorite part of the job. "Why are you coming out?" asks Alvin when his brother crawls up onto the tilted deck and catches his breath. "That's all there is. Rest is all broken." "You sure? You want to go down and look?" Alvin does not swim. There was a decent pond when they lived in Inkster, but he never took to it. DeWitt thinks he's afraid of bumping into a fish. Alvin arranges all 3 bottles in the bag, stuffing newspaper in between so they don't clamp together, while DeWitt pulls on his clothes. How'd the other ones get broke down in the water? Oh, maybe when a crate hit the dock. Or maybe it was bullets from the hooch squad. Goes Alvin, making a machine gun sound. Yeah, we're just lucky we got what we did. How come there's never any colored gangsters in the movies? Just some old cotton picker in overalls playing his harmonica when they take the white boy to the chair. Who you think makes those stories? White folks? There's your answer. DeWitt starts out ahead of Alvin, needing time to think over what he bumped into. "Hey, wait up!" Alvin is a good kid, accepts it like a man when DeWitt tells him, "No, you can't come on this one." He's scrawny as hell, not like DeWitt or their father, who can lift a ton of liquid metal on a long metal pole. Maybe Alvin thinks if he watches the fighters long enough, he'll grow some muscles. What do you think they'll pay? "Well, that dry law is about over here, but good liquor is still hard to get." Even with his clothes back on, DeWitt is still cold. And then there's the other, the member of that bump, turning and singing. "Look out!" There are 3 white boys, maybe a bit younger than DeWitt, standing in the street where they have to go down to catch the streetcar to Black Bottom. "You lost?" asked the biggest of the 3, dark-haired with a beak of a nose. "Just passing through." "You don't pass through here," says the boy, shaking his head, "without our permission." "And who might you be?" In a different situation, DeWitt might fight them. You know, try one out, they went out quick and scare the other 2 away. But he's got Alvin. Alvin gets even a bloody nose. He'll be hell to pay at home. "We're the Dixie Gang," says the boy. "This is our river." "It's a long stretch of water to protect." "We own a chunk of it," says another of the boys. "What's in the bag?" "It's ours," says Alvin. "We found it." The first boy snaps his fingers, holds out his hand. "Give it up." DeWitt holds them with his eyes as he takes the bag from Alvin, pulls out a bottle, holds it up over his head. "I could give you this," he said, "or I could bust it over your head." The boys looked to their leader, who was calculating. "Any more where that came from?" "Sure, but you gotta get wet to find it." The boy nods. "Okay, pay the tax and make yourself scarce." DeWitt tosses the bottle gently, and the boy catches it, then steps aside. "Don't come back." The boys don't follow them. DeWitt can tell that Alvin feels bad about it. "Hey, if they pulled what we just done in Inkster," he says to his little brother, "I'd have charged them 2 bottles tax." That gets a laugh. They come to the streetcar stop, and DeWitt can see it coming down the track 3 blocks away. Streetcars are neutral ground. The brakemen pretty tough customers who won't put up with any scuffling. The body, what DeWitt got to see of it, was so bloated you couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, colored or white, just a floating bag of gas with some rags of clothes stuck to it. Nothing you want to be caught within 10 blocks of, especially if you're the wrong color for the neighborhood. It's somebody's job to fish those things out, cut the clothes off, see if they can figure out who they were, but DeWitt doesn't want any part of it. Bad enough he's got that picture in his head, got the feel of it bumping against his naked skin. If Alvin doesn't know, he doesn't have to think about it, doesn't have to tell lies, so let him be a kid for a while longer. A white lady stares at DeWitt some on the streetcar. At first he thinks it's the bag with the bottles in it, but then he realizes his unders have soaked through his pants, and it looks like he's wet himself. A story to tell her friends. They get off at Hastings and Adams stop and head for Antoine's, where they sold their treasures before. They're a block away when Alvin stops in his tracks. "That's him." "Who?" "Him." It is Joe Louis, Alvin's favorite fighter. Alvin has dragged DeWitt to the Golden Gloves around town a few times, and with Louis, it's not much of a show. First round, boom, a short punch you hardly see, and the other guy kisses the canvas. 3 of them were in the first round, and the last bout, where he won the light heavyweights at the Olympia, it went for 3, but the opponent finally went down. Alvin is tugging on DeWitt's arm. "Let's go say hello. He's with a friend." "It doesn't matter." Joe looks peaceful, like a lot of fighters when they're out of the ring. Light-colored, maybe a bit Indian-looking. He grins when he sees Alvin come up. "I know you. We saw you beat Bucky. He went down like a ton of bricks." "Yeah, that was a good fight. People got their 2 bits worth." "This is my brother DeWitt." Louis nods to DeWitt. "You look like you could be in the ring." "Too much work for me," the boxer nods. "Don't I know it?" His friend points to the tote bag. "What you got in there? A chicken?" "We found it in the river," says Alvin, almost hopping with excitement. "You found a dead chicken in the river? Let's see it." DeWitt lifts a bottle of whiskey from the bag. Fell out of somebody's rowboat, did it?" "There was a whole case, but most of it was broken," Alvin informs the friend. DeWitt wonders when the floating corpse will be found, or if after a while the body deflates and sinks back to the bottom. "That's a quart of good liquor you got there. You want to sell that before it gets legal." "We give you 1 free," says Alvin to Joe. The fighter laughs. "Thanks, I don't drink. Training." "Oh, that's right. Joe's gonna go pro pretty soon," boasts a friend. Gotta be ready for whoever they throw at you." "Watch out, world," says Alvin. "How old are you?" 9, says Alvin, who was only 8. "We had a fight with some white boys, but DeWitt scared them away." "That right?" DeWitt shakes his head. "It cost us 1 bottle to get clear." Louis gives them an easy smile. "Yeah, maybe you could be a fighter. Gotta use your head." Alvin is just about dancing as they continue to Antoine's. "Joe Louis said he knew me by sight." "Yeah, he's just an amateur," said DeWitt. "There was how many? More than 1,000 in that tournament? Yeah, but he's going places, Dee. You're going to remember this day. DeWitt thinks it was a bare hand, bloated and purple, that touched him first, that rested on his shoulder for a moment. I expect I will. And this little bit is about a year later, maybe two. The Ruther brothers, Walter and Victor, were labor organizers. They were considered very progressive, even radical in their day. And they have decided that if the auto workers are going to get anywhere, the one domino that has to be knocked down first is Henry Ford. Henry Ford had no stockholders in the Ford Motor Company. He owned the company out of his pocket. If he wanted to shut it down, he could shut it down, and he did a couple times. And just said, okay, it's all yours. Tough luck. You're out of a job. This is a point where they're starting to get a little bit of traction with the guys who work at Ford, even though they have to hide to talk to each other. They're afraid to be seen with, their lips moving on the assembly line. At the time, a little guy about this tall named Harry Bennett was the head of the service department. And the service department did things like, in the men's room at the River Rouge factory, there were no doors on the stalls. So not only if you left the line to go to the bathroom was there a foreman with a stopwatch timing how long you were gone and when you came back to the line, when you sat down on the toilet, there's no door, and there's a service guy, usually an ex-con, looking at you, just to make sure you don't talk to anybody while you're in there. Things are getting a little too close to the guys getting together and doing something for Henry Ford, and he asked his service department guy, Harry Bennett, to do something about it. Harry Bennett had very good connections with the underworld in Detroit, and there was a pretty lively one. Even though Chicago gets all the ink, they had a very lively Prohibition period. And so all he had to do was drop a couple hints. It turns out that keeping tabs on the guy is no Sunday picnic, even though they've rented an apartment just down the street from his place on the Saddle. The guy is never fucking home, and it turns out neither is the wife, always off at the Union Hall or making a speech or throwing a monkey wrench into the works of one of the parts outfits that Gillespie handles for Harry Bennett. The plan has been gone over enough times, so maybe because Federal Screw rolled over and signed with a fucking local this morning, Bud gets the call. It's on, somebody tells him. They're home now. So he goes by Purcell's place, and Eddie's got the heater stashed behind his icebox, which Bud almost gets a hernia helping him move out of the way. Do these things still shoot? I don't know. I never used them. Terrific. Even if the idea is only to scare the shit out of the little prick, you want to know that the hardware is in working order. It's a crummy apartment building. Whatever they pay this Ruther guy at the local, he's not spending it on rent. Couple beater cars out front, nobody on the street, sun just about to drop below the roof line. Perfect. I do the talking, if there is any, he tells Purcell as they get out of the car. Eddie used to move hooch for Chet Lemaire in the bad old days, and is not known as being trigger-happy or too jumpy to trust. Just a guy picking up a few dollars. They tugged their hats down low and climbed to the second floor, Bud having cased the spot enough times to know which door and knock. With as many shitless as Ruther is on, you'd think he'd at least have a peephole to scan the visitors with. But no, some broad, not the wife, opens the door with a big grin on her kisser, and there they stand, 45s drawn and ready to do business, and it's a fucking party. There must be 10 people inside, men and women with a birthday cake on the table, not cut into yet, all looking like, who invited these two? Bud senses Purcell ready to scarf her, so he pushes past the broad and points his pistol at Walter, who he's seen a couple times. He's the red-headed brother. Okay, Red, you're coming with us, Bud shouts, hoping at least some screams for the ladies, but nothing. Just a skinny brother and a couple of the other guys holding up their hands and drifting into his line of fire. No way he leaves, they say. Shoot if you want, but he stays, they say. You can't kill us all, they say. Actually, we could kill you all, Bud thinks, but it would be a fucking mess, and not the point he's been sent to make. So he grabs the floor lamp standing next to him, the cord popping from the wall socket when he attacks Ruther with it. The thing not weighted right for it to be much of a weapon, so he tosses it and pulls out the sap he was going to work him over with later, and starts flailing with that, the Union bastard catching most of it on his arms as he backs up, practiced now at taking a beating. And Bud finds himself yelling to Purcelli, shoot him, shoot the red bastard, hoping Purcelli will have the sense enough to point but not to fire, and something whizzes by his head and smashes against the wall. A pickle jar. The broad who opened the door threw a fucking pickle jar at him, and now one of the guys must have gone out the window because there's somebody on the street yelling, help! They're killing him upstairs! Call the police! Out, says Bud, pointing to the door, and Eddie beats him to it, running down the stairs like a couple of pansies got their fannies slapped, and the guy on the street is still yelling bloody murder, backing away when he sees them. Bud is glad he put on a bogus plate before they started over. The least you can do if you're out to kidnap somebody. And Purcelli doesn't even have his door shut, and Bud flattens the gas pedal and they blow the scene. Fucking dimwit sons of bitches, he observes as they drive. Tell me they're home and forget to mention they got half the communist fucking party in there for cocktails? I mean, how fucking stupid can you be? He pulls into an empty lot on Linwood, kills the engine. The .45 in his jacket pocket now is digging into his side, so he yanks it out and tosses it onto Purcelli's lap. And what have you got to say for yourself? Eddie, who hasn't opened his trap since they left for the job, thinks for a moment before he answers. That cake looked good. Questions? Anybody? Yes.
What is it about this period of American history that drew you to write about?
Yeah, I have been thinking about writing something about Detroit for a long time. You know, growing up in the 50s and 60s, Detroit was this muscular city. All the cars came from there. I don't think I saw a foreign car on the road ever. You know, maybe in a movie or city, some little tinny little thing that didn't look like you'd want to own it. And it, you know, had two major, you know, a football team and a baseball team and eventually a basketball team. And then it started to fall apart. You know, the Ford and the other automakers pulled out, first down south and then overseas. I got to go to Detroit in 1980. I covered the Republican convention for a magazine. It was the first Reagan convention, and got to walk around Detroit a little bit. And it was in bad shape. It was kind of like a guy with a lot of teeth missing, because so many houses had been burned down in pretty good neighborhoods. They were formerly pretty good neighborhoods. A lot of unemployment, a lot of people on the street. And it was so bad that the Republicans decided, we don't want our delegates to freak out when they come through it to the Joe Louis Center, where the convention was happening. So they put at least a third, maybe half of them up in Windsor, Canada, and brought them over a bridge to the Joe Louis Center. And then something I saw myself was not only did they do that, but they put cardboard in the side windows. So the delegates didn't have to see any of this blight, you know, and stuff that might scare them. So I started thinking about how does that happen, and when that happens, what does it do to people, and how did that get started? How did it, you know, get to be this major city in the first place? And then 3 or 4 years ago, thinking about Henry Ford, some producers approached me. And they'd taken an option on a really good nonfiction book called Fordlandia, written by Greg Grandin, and where he explains this experiment, or whatever Henry Ford thought it was, of I'm going to go down and, you know, have rubber plantations in Brazil, and I'm going to run them just like I run Dearborn, Michigan, with a model community. And it did not work out very well. It was kind of his Vietnam. In fact, it's unfortunately a good allegory for our foreign policy for the last 40 years or whatever. And that kind of just clicked with me of, oh, that's the imperialist part of Henry Ford. He was already kind of this king or emperor or whatever. So I started doing a little research and stuff, and I realized in the way that Detroit has served as kind of the front lines, as kind of a crucible, a test ground for all these major forces that have shaped what America is, and before there were cars even. The crime thing, prohibition. There they were, right across a very narrow river from Canada, where all the goods, there were distilleries just across the river, and it wasn't too hard to take boats across the river and avoid lots of little islands to hide in, and lots of cops of various sorts to bribe, and so it was on the front lines of that. It was on the front lines of the labor movement with the Ruther Brothers and other people trying to organize, and it was on the front lines of race. Henry Ford, when he was the people's tycoon, and everybody loved him, he decided one day, I'm going to pay my workers twice what everybody else does in the auto industry so they can afford the product that they make. And all of a sudden, there was one of the first places where this idea that a working guy who just was an unskilled laborer could not only own a car, but maybe only own a house. And that became this new American dream. And he was one of the first people behind that. He also was paying his African-American workers the same wages as white workers were. Nobody was doing that, north or south. And they weren't all janitor jobs. A lot of them were, in the foundry or on the assembly lines. So it was the front line of race, because all of a sudden there's this northern city up near the Canadian border, and there's all these black people who are coming up to work for Mr. Ford, because they can make a decent, they could have a house themselves maybe. They can support their family. Eventually what happened, and I didn't know this when I started, I had certainly known about I think it's 68, there was a race riot there, the Algiers motel incident, and awful stuff happened. There was one in the early 40s. Once we got into World War II, a lot more people were needed. A lot of African Americans came up to take jobs. They weren't getting put into combat positions in the Army. Along with women were more and more, and there wasn't any housing for them. So not only did these people, white people coming up the South and black people coming up from the South were working side by side, but all of a sudden, because of this housing crunch, they were living side by side, and there was another huge race riot. So in that way, Detroit really was this crucible, this testing ground for, is this going to work, or is it going to explode? And in many cases, it exploded. Yes?
On Fordlandia, I have heard, and maybe you can confirm if this is true or not, that one of the things that Henry Ford did was he figured he would pay the local labor the same wages that he would pay in Dearborn. And what he found, what he didn't realize, was that to those workers, that was such a princely sum of money that they would just go off and not come back.
Yeah, it wasn't quite the same as it was, but it was awfully good for Brazil, and especially good for that part of Brazil, where not too long before that, Brazil didn't get rid of slavery until 1888, and there were people who were, recruited to be rubber tappers for the rubber barons, who, if they didn't make their knot and bring in enough rubber, had their hands cut off. So any pay, where they didn't cut your hands off if you didn't do a good job, was pretty good to those people. But also, this happened in the coal mines in Appalachia when they first started. People said, well, I need this much money to pay off my debt or to buy something or, pay the rent. And when they had it, they just walk away. And he wanted people who were going to be there 24/7, you know, do your duty. What he also did was he wanted them. He got that thing that I think a lot of really successful people do, which is I not only know how to make cars and sell them, I know how people should live. And so I'm going to be really magnanimous and I'm going to teach them how to live. And he did that in Dearborn very successfully, at least at first. And in Brazil, it was, they're going to live in this perfect little Midwestern village. And the roofs are going to be, and they're going to have, they had picket fences, and they're going to have a garden, and you had to have a garden, and something had to be planted in it. You couldn't keep chickens anymore, and all these kind of rules. The roofs turned out to, in the summer, make the places like ovens. And so all the Brazilian workers are sitting outside of their houses in the summer because it's too hot to go inside. And you had to be on Detroit time, so your time zone was not what it would be if you were in the real Brazil, in this little bubble. And a lot of it really was, like our foreign policy, he went into a place thinking he was doing something kind of magnanimous, but he didn't understand the culture. None of his people spoke the language when they came down. And so there were attempts to unionize in Brazil way before there were in Detroit, and Brazil had no history of unions at all. It was just like, we're not eating this food anymore, or whatever it was. And there were a couple, big wildcat riots, not just strikes down there, and he just couldn't understand why it wasn't working, but never went down there to check it out. Yes?
So I've been reading Detroit, I Do Mind Dying, about the history of radical labor organizing by black workers in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
How does that story find a way into your book?
Yeah, it's complex. There are a couple really good scholars have done big studies on this, and I was able to read those. The complex part of it at Ford, very specifically, was that he was paying people the same. And Harry Bennett, this kind of enforcer of his, started kind of moving and recruiting people and giving the idea of, well, Mr. Ford did this for you, you have to be loyal to him. And unions were kind of new in people's heads, especially in that trade. And so for the African-American workers, when they started hearing, the white guys are thinking of getting together and forming a union, there was no long tradition of unions being, inclusive. Very often they would say, well, no Chinese, or no this or no that. So they're thinking, well, maybe they'll get a union, and they'll just say, well, you guys are left out. So there was this idea in Ford's head, the black workers will go out. They're going to be loyal to me. They know where their bread is buttered. And in fact, when the first big wildcat strike happened, not only did the company thugs close off the doors to the foundry where most of the black workers, like 80% of the black workers were working, they got them all together and said, these crazy people are going to take over the place and you're not going to have any jobs, and we've made weapons for you. They actually went and on lathes and things made these car parts into swords, and you're going to take these and you're going to go out and fight them. That didn't go very well. There was one clash and people got hurt. Nobody got killed, luckily. And then there were some very big meetings within the black community. The two big communities at that time were called Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. And there's a nightclub where like 1,000 people went in the nightclub, and guys from the UAW and guys from this kind of company union came and talked to them, and somebody came and talked about vote no union at all. And they didn't keep exact tabs, but it was probably only 60% of the black workers voted to have a union. Most of them voted no union instead of the company union. So it was rocky, and then when the work continued during our involvement in World War II, and they were making bombers up in Willow Run, that kind of overcrowding and distrust, even within the union, kind of broke out in this riot. There were probably a dozen. They were called racemen at the time, who just realized this. This is our only way out of this situation. We got to get into the ground floor of this union, and so they were on the marches and they went within their communities. Famously, there were two churches where the preachers were progressive, and when anything came up, they didn't say you have to do what Mr. Ford tells you. They said, well, you have to consider both sides, and we think, if we're going to go forward in this country, we have to get these unions to accept us. However, if you were a black worker and you had a car and you drove, to that parish because it wasn't near you, you parked at least 3 blocks away because the service department would cruise the parking lots and take down the license numbers. And if they found your license number, if you went to that church, you lost your job. So it was a fraught time. And what I always, kind of always remind actors when I'm working with them is, you haven't read the end of this scene. You don't know how it turned. You haven't read this. You haven't seen this movie. And, some of my characters have to make this decision. Maybe this union thing is just a fad. Maybe you could do it somewhere else, but not with Henry Ford, who can close the factory down tomorrow. One of my characters, Rosa Schimmel, said, a young radical, maybe communism is the answer. Maybe in 3 years we're going to have a workers' paradise. She doesn't know how it turns out. And so, all these characters are having to make really hard decisions about which way they're going to go in this thing. And it's dangerous to even get together in the back room of a bar with a bunch of other fellow Polish, guys who work on the line and talk, because one of them might be wrong. Anybody else? Yes?
Yeah, what was your research like?
My research, my thing about research is I usually do kind of a big overall research. Not all of my books are historical fiction, but when they are, there's this great thing that somebody has written your plot for you and given you a timeline. And then you break off what you want to chew, kind of. And I say, okay, this is the time period I'm going to deal with. What are the events that are the kind of headline events that these people would go through, or maybe see, or whatever. And then as your characters develop, you kind of can think, well, who would be there? There's a famous incident right at the factory called the Battle of the Overpass. There was an overpass that went from the River Rouge factory to their parking lot, and where the trolleys came up to bring the people who didn't have cars up. And even though the Ford company had built it, it was leased to the railroad, so it was public property. So the UAW sent people to leaflet on that little overpass. And, it turned into a riot, and people, the Ruther brothers got beat to hell again, and somebody got some pictures of them, and that was one of the things that actually helped the union, get other people enraged about the treatment that was happening. 3 of my characters, I realized, the guy who's a reporter would have to be there to cover it. The woman who's a radical, she'd be handing out leaflets, and Kaz Pilsudski, my Polish guy who's in the assembly building, he'd be coming out from his shift right as this beating is happening. What did I just step into here? So you start to see some kind of pattern of who's going to be where. And then, my rule is no more than a week or 2 of research, and you have to sit down and write some fiction. Or else you're just going to keep going into it. I'd still be doing research, and it would have taken me somewhere else. So I do a lot of stopping and just saying, okay, and I put a couple question marks there, and I say, learn more about this. And it might be, how were Fords made in 1936 as opposed to 1927? The jobs changed, and so your life as a worker changed. At one point I realized, The guy has lost his job, Cass has lost his job, and his wife is looking for something, and she comes back all excited. She just got a job as a typist, even though she can't type, and she said, but I have to go down to the post office. There's this new thing called a social security number, and they're going to give me some number, I don't know when that happened until I start doing this kind of research. Yes.
As you know, Ford was a virulent anti-Semite, along with Lindbergh and others. And I'm just curious, they were kind of rooting for Hitler. And
It's interesting. They weren't rooting for Hitler. I think they were just anti-Semitic.
Right.
So Hitler was a fan of Henry Ford. Henry Ford wasn't a fan of Hitler. Henry Ford actually, during World War I, even before the United States got into it, he thought this is such a waste of people's lives and time and stuff. I'm going to rent an ocean liner and fill it with anti-war people, and I'm going to go over to Paris, and I'm going to announce to all these warring parties, you don't have to slaughter each other more. Come talk to me, and I'll settle this. He wasn't after a Nobel Prize. I don't think that existed. Nobody wanted to talk to him. And it was like, geez. And he wasn't crazy about Hitler. He made money on wars, but he thought they were stupid. He thought Hitler was an idiot. But, we're still into selling stuff to Germany until we got into the war. The anti-Semitic thing, I think, came with, like a lot of people, was just out of ignorance. He grew up on a farm. He'd never met a Jew in his life until he started making cars. He could sit down and, he hired a Jewish guy to build most of his, buildings for his factories and stuff like that. But he bought that myth of the time, and it was bad enough when it was just, most Americans were anti-Semitic. Most of them had never met a Jew at that point. There in Chicago, in Detroit, there was Father Coughlin, this radio priest who had a national show, who was anti-Semitic at the top of his lungs, all over the country. So this is the atmosphere that he's in. And then his press agent, Ernest Leibold, which I think is such a perfect name for a press agent, who was a German-American who was very pro-Reich and was a fan of Hitler's, is the one who brought him the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, this thing that some Russian con man had just made up a couple of years earlier, and said, this explains it. You're always grumbling about bankers. This explains it all. And Henry Ford said, oh yeah, people should know this. We'll start serializing it in our house order. So he was propagating this stuff. Eventually had to back up and apologize a couple times. He would find the head of some Jewish organization in New York and say, write me an apology. And then he'd just sign it, so he didn't have to say anything himself. And he and Lindbergh both did get a medal. I have a scene in the book where he gets this medal. He has no idea what it is. It's some German thing, or what a swastika is at that point, but he's in a picture, waving. So it's a complicated thing with him, but it's what everybody remembers now. So it's a good lesson for everybody is, keep it to yourself. A stupid opinion, keep it to yourself. Yes?
Is there a big difference for you between screenplay writing and novel writing?
Some just in your willpower to get up and do it. You write a screenplay, it's not a thing in itself. It's like, oh, I want to be a builder, and you do a lot of blueprints, and you never get to make a house. Because somebody has to give you the money to build the house. And so I don't write, screenplays just on my own anymore. It's been so hard for us to raise money for things. So there's that. Whereas, it's not even ink anymore, and paper and ink, except for those damn things that the printers ask for. That's most of my salary for going book is for replacing 40 pages of printing, and it wants more ink. So there is that practical stuff. Then just you use a lot of the same muscles, especially in dialogue. But movies and TV, even people who watch them in little pieces, they're related to time. Movies, let's say it's a 2-hour movie. When you're writing the script, you have to be very aware. I'm 10 minutes into the movie. Do people who know who the lead character is? Do they know what the problem is? That that's why so much stuff you watch on TV starts with somebody getting murdered. Oh, thank God. I just saw somebody accident. Now I know what this is going to be like. So there is that you have to always think about with TV or something. A book this size or anything over about 150 pages, nobody's going to sit it down and read it in one sitting. So you have a very different relationship with time. In a book my size, where I have a lot of characters, I'll just realize, oh, I'm bringing this character back, and they have not been heard from for 150, 200 pages. I have to kind of introduce them again, some things about them, just so that the reader remembers, oh, that guy. Where, in the movie, you're watching the movie, and it's, oh, it's Steve Buscemi again. He was a good guy this time, a bad guy this time. And you don't need that reminder. So there are some definite differences. Then there's the scale. I can do the Willow Run factory making B-24s. It's a factory a half a mile long, or the the River Rouge factory here. I don't have to get art people to come and recreate it or any of that kind of stuff. I've had battles. I did the Battle of Culloden at the beginning of Jamie MacGillivray, and I didn't have to rent a horse. So there's that kind of thing that you can do with scale. And then another difference for me is if it's something that I got to write, direct, and edit. When you get to make a movie, yes, there's your screenplay, but there's all these really talented people you work with who have talents you don't have. And you can just say, okay, this guy was a Jacobite. He failed to, bring Bonnie Prince Charlie to the throne. They didn't hang him. They're sending him to the New World. It's 1761, and it's the British are sending him on a ship. They gotta say, well, what ships would they have to do that? What would they look like? How many sails? What does it look like? In my book, I have to describe that stuff if you're going to feel like you're with the prisoners down in the hold of that ship, or when they come up to the deck. So they're making a movie. You can write in a kind of shorthand because you're going to have these other people. You're going to have a costumer. You're going to have a production designer, a cinematographer. So that's very different about them, is that when you're writing a screenplay, you're saying, oh, this is what I'm going to show the people who are going to come and we're going to make this thing together. Yes?
What do you prefer? Do you prefer writing a screenplay or a book?
I prefer writing a screenplay if I know I've got the money to make the movie, because it's going to be a lot of fun, and you get to do it with some of the people who are your friends, and you're going to meet new people who have all these skills, and get to go to a place you haven't gone before. But the satisfaction in a book, whether you get it, and I've never been totally sure, rarely been totally sure I'm going to get something published, you get to make the thing itself. And so when you sit down, you don't feel like you might be wasting your time. When you sit down to write a screenplay, you can feel like a real sap. Like, who's going to make this? Who's going to put up the money to make this? Am I kidding myself? Yes?
Do you have screenplays that never came to be?
I've written probably about 110 screenplays, and there's probably about 10 that I wrote hoping to make them, and there's about 4 that I'd still think, make a really good movie. But we haven't been able to raise anybody else's money, OPM, other people's money, in about 20 years. So, and I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of filmmakers who, aren't making anything because they can't raise the money. And it can be very, especially if it's an independent film, that money's very whimsical. You know, people who have too much money and think it would be fun to invest in a film, they may turn around and say, yeah, I'm going to buy a racehorse.
John,
Yes.
you write every day? What's your discipline when you're writing a novel? You have a set time?
Yeah, if I don't have anything else going, yeah, I probably write something every day, or I do some research every day. When I don't have a book I'm working on or something, I don't necessarily do any writing at all, you know. I don't have to. I'm not one of those, you know, driven, but once I'm into the story, I like writing, so it's something that's fun to do. So it's like, oh yeah, I'll get into that today. And I'm very lucky, and I don't know, you know, all writers work different than each other and have different, you know, kind of ways their attention goes and their work, you know, their progress goes. I forget my own writing very, very quickly. So if I, you know, am writing along and then I want to go back and revise a chapter, if that's 3 days ago, it's who wrote this. And it can be, who wrote this? Who wrote this, you know? But, you know, for me, writing is to have something to rewrite. And if you've forgotten it, pretty much, it's easier to rewrite it because you're not trying to protect anything. Yes?
So are there historical characters in writing this novel that you fell in love with and you didn't expect to fall in love with?
There are ones who surprised me. Harry Bennett is you know, he does these awful things. He's kind of a charming, fun guy. You know, if you think of that guy Bovino who just got, he has none of Harry Bennett's charm or skills. He was just short and nasty. But he's kind of fun to spend time with. Every once in a while, it's a character that I've created and not a historical one. Just, you know, all of a sudden I have this character Smitty who works for the Detroit Free Press, and he's, you know, he's kind of a World War I vet, and he's, you know, cynical like reporters. You know, he's right out of those early '30s movies about newsrooms, and he's kind of had his eye on this woman's maybe 7 years younger, and she's kind of 3 inches taller than him, and she looks like, you know, somebody who should be singing opera, and she's from Grosse Pointe, and she's a society writer, but she's really a tough cookie and should be writing hard news, and they start almost accidentally doing things together, and I realize, oh, it's the Thin Man. You know, I've got Nick and Norrell Charles here, and they're really fun to hang out with. I got to know more about Joe Louis in his younger days. His first job in the auto business was, because he was a strong kid, was pushing automobiles that didn't have their engines in them, you know, out onto a lot to have something done to make the engine work. Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo show up because Diego, Edsel Ford, who's a nice character, he's a guy who you probably would have liked if you met him. He financed Diego Rivera coming and doing this incredible mural called Detroit Industry at the Art Institute there. And actually ended up having lunch with Henry Ford, and I don't know what they did say, but I get to do that scene where they talk to each other, and they actually got along pretty well, interested in what the other did. And I came upon this great little, you know, doing my newspaper research, and I don't think it was the Free Press, I think it was one of the other Detroit papers. And it's a little picture, and there's Frida, and they lived in a hotel across from the Art Institute. She didn't have anything to do. She was pregnant and worried about it because she had so many health problems that I'd love to have this baby, but it might kill me. And she was sitting around doing nothing. She didn't speak English very well at that point. She would go to the movies and they weren't subtitled into Spanish, so she liked the Three Stooges. I love that. And that's kind of what she thought of Americans. And it's a picture of her sitting at a very small, at an easel with a very small canvas with a very small brush, and the thing under it says, and Mrs. Rivera dabbles in artistic adventures as well. Which was true. And it is where her first great painting is called Henry Ford Hospital, and it's when she asked the doctor, I can't have this baby, and he, kind of hastened a miscarriage, and it's a painting of hers, and it says Henry Ford Hospital on the frame of the bed. She's kind of levitating from the bed, and then there's these things coming out of her, including the fetus of the baby and stuff like that. And Diego Rivera, after a long day on the scaffold doing this mural, came in and said, "Okay, that's you. This isn't you trying to be an artist with all the other artists in your head. That's just your crazy shit, and keep doing it." So it was really, for her, as unhappy as she was, it was kind of when she got onto, I'm just going to do what I want to, and all this crazy stuff in my head, I'm going to put it on a canvas. You have a question? No. One more question. Yeah.
How do you come to your next project? And do you work on projects simultaneously though?
The Detroit thing was probably in my head while I was doing other books. So just your antenna go out if you think you might do something about something, and you hear some factoid, and that might be it. I should look into that, or I didn't know that character was involved in that. But usually there's a little period where for instance, I was done with this when my last book came out. And it did well enough that we were sitting down with the publisher. And he said, "So I read your new book, let's do it." And that was nice, so I knew I had another book coming out. And so I've already written another book. It's called Gods of Gotham, and it's set in New York City between 1949 and 1951, New York City and the Catskills. And it's got a little on the waterfront in it, and some West Side Story, and a lot of crooked politics, and the beginnings of live TV in New York, and how that started to become important to Americans. And then kind of one thing in the center is the City College point shaving scandal in basketball. When City College was, as it is today, a free college. It was 80% Jewish. They had a basketball team that was 8 Jewish guys and 4 black guys, every one of them the son of an immigrant. And they won both the NCAA and the NIT tournament, or the 2 end-of-the-year tournaments, despite, you're the best college basketball team in America if you win those. And they had been, it came out a year later, taking gamblers' money to shave points during games. So it was like the heights of adulation to your scum and get out of here. So that was something I had heard about, that scandal years and years ago, kind of like I heard about the Black Sox scandal in baseball. And it was something I always kind of came back to, and when something new would come out about it, I'd read up on it, and then I started realizing, this is the same time as on the waterfront and all that stuff on the docks that was happening. And this is the same time as the Puerto Ricans were coming to New York in droves. And this is the same time as the Kefauver Commission, when people wanted to see TV because they were seeing their mayor and, Meyer Lansky or somebody like that, on TV. That kind of stuff I get to think about for a while, especially the history stuff, because there are things that you just kind of, somebody wrote a new book. I'll have to look into it. Thanks, everybody.